While awaiting trial in Philadelphia in 1895, serial killer H.H. Holmes wrote, "I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing." To this day, Holmes is known as one of American history's first serial killers, and perhaps its deadliest, with some accounts claiming that he killed up to 200 people across the United States in the 1880s and 90s. But perhaps even more than his reported number of victims, it was his devilish methods that sealed his place in history. During the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, Holmes allegedly constructed a murder castle so that he could lure some of the fair's 27 million visitors into his lair, where he purportedly tortured them, killed them, and burned their bodies in his basement kiln. Equipped with mazes, hallways to nowhere, soundproof rooms, and homemade gas chambers, Holmes supposedly played disturbing games of cat and mouse with his victims before butchering them. By the time he was finally caught in 1894, Holmes had reportedly killed somewhere between 20 and 200 people. Details of his crimes filled newspapers across the country, and Holmes and his murder castle were forever cemented into the grisliest annals of true crime lore. Even more than a century later, in 2003, these ghastly crimes inspired Erik Larson's popular account of Holmes and the World's Fair called The Devil in the White City. Some have even speculated that Holmes was really Jack the Ripper, operating in the United States after evading police back in England. But the truth behind H.H. Holmes' life and crimes remains difficult to decipher. Though he certainly scammed and murdered people, Holmes may have taken fewer than 10 victims, not 20, and definitely not 200. And his murder castle, described in salacious detail in books like Larson's, as well as contemporaneous newspaper accounts, may not have been as replete with trapdoors, secret passageways, torture devices, and acid baths as some have previously suggested. Still, there's no doubt that H.H. Holmes was an especially sly and sinister killer. Charming and charismatic, he naturally drew people in, only to betray or kill them, whether they were men, women, or children. In the end, however, though H.H. Holmes may not have murdered 200 people, he certainly did more than enough to make his haunting claim that he was born with the devil inside him ring all too chillingly true. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And you know it's me, your boy, All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
Today, we're untangling the blood-soaked story of H.H. Holmes, one of the very first serial killers in American history, and perhaps one of the most misunderstood.
Thought I'd switch it up a little bit there at the beginning. Start off.
That was good.
Keep the vibes loose, having fun.
Yeah, they're going to be very loose.
Talking about something gruesome.
That's kind of our bread and butter, is it not?
It is. I think I first heard about H.H. Holmes from this book that I had in like my middle school years. It was like called like Captain John's Bathroom Reader for Kids or something along those lines.
And H.H. Holmes was in it?
It was just like
for
a
kids?
big, thick blue book full of a bunch of like facts and stuff that you could presumably read while you were in the bathroom.
Oh.
So it would just be like blurbs. And one of them was like, yeah, H.H. Holmes had this hotel where he killed a bunch of people. And I was like,
wow.
whoa.
It's not a very kid-friendly fact.
No, it was very weird. But that was where it first came to my attention.
Huh.
So
I had never heard about him until I read Devil in the White City a few years ago.
Yeah. You've recommended that book a few times.
I have. And so it was interesting researching this podcast because there's some stuff that was in the book that's not quite true.
Ah, it is a nonfiction book though, right? It's not like a fictionalized.
It's nonfiction, but it's written like a novel in a lot of ways.
Okay.
You know, he says at the beginning he's gone through, Erik Larson's the author, he's gone through like letters, other documents that he can reconstruct dialogue and things like that. So it reads it's a very easy read. It reads like a novel. But his scenes were like Holmes is like killing someone. And I was like, how would you know that specific thing?
Right.
And when I was reading it, and I'm like, oh, okay, because he took a couple liberties.
Yeah, extrapolated a little bit and got it.
A little bit, yeah. Although I've read other books of his that I have enjoyed as well.
No, something to check out, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a cool book. I would still recommend it. I think just for the World's Fair stuff, it's cool.
Right,
and then
right.
the murder stuff is something, it's two different things going on at the same time. Yeah, so let's jump into who this guy was, H.H. Holmes, which wasn't his real name.
Right.
He was born Herman Webster Mudgett.
Ew.
It's not as frightening of a name.
Yeah.
It's H.H. Holmes.
Mudgett.
Webster Mudgett,
Ugh.
yeah.
Sounds like something out of a Harry Potter book.
It does kind of, that Mudgett. Yeah, doesn't quite strike fear into your heart. But in any case, he was born in May 1861. Not much is known about his childhood, but what is known is a bit off-putting. He had an abusive father. He was supposed to be very intelligent, interested in medicine, and he explored this by conducting surgery on animals, which is never a good sign among serial killers. And there are rumors that he was responsible for the death of a childhood friend.
Oof, yeah.
So bad.
I mean, it's the same kind of stuff you see, I guess, with a lot of serial killers, right? They always, not always, but often come from abusive homes.
Mm-hmm.
They lash out against animals. It's all cut from the same cloth.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Even the interest in like Dahmer had like interest in like animals and animals like bodies and stuff.
Right.
And yeah. So he, definitely kind of an odd childhood, and looking at it through the lens of where he ended up, and then as a young adult, he started embarking on a life of crime. He started robbing graves and morgues, and so selling the cadavers to medical schools or to set up some kinds of life insurance scams, which will be a pattern in his life.
Weird. I wonder, what do you tell a medical school when you just have a cadaver?
Well, they needed cadavers. They were asking a lot of questions.
Oh, that's fair, I guess, yeah.
And at the time.
Right.
Maybe there's more questions asked now, I hope.
I would hope so. If you just turn up somewhere and you're like, hey, I have this dead body. You guys want it?
Want it? It's only $100.
It's fresh.
Yeah, no, they needed them, and so they would pay him, is my understanding.
I guess you could always lie and say you work for like a funeral home or some sort of end-of-life service as well. Set up.
Yeah, that's true. You know. Yeah, we've had some stories on the site in the past like 2 years about funeral home scams.
Yeah.
So it happens. Yeah, he did go to medical school, and in a sign of things to come, his graduation was almost derailed when a woman came forward and said that he had promised to marry her only to renege. This would happen again and again. He soon married someone else and had a child, but abandoned the family. And he is this guy who, like, when you meet him, he seems cool, charming, but he could be very manipulative and cold kind of beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So maybe a bit sociopathic.
Yeah. Again, very typical of people like this.
So he eventually moves to Chicago in 1885 and finds a job as a pharmacist. And this is around the same time he changes his name from Mudgett to Holmes. He takes the name H.H. Holmes. He works as a pharmacist in Chicago. He marries again and again. He's like he'll meet someone and like say he's single, and they'll fall in love with him. And he's meanwhile trying to scam them in some way. He also starts building what will become known as the Murder Castle in Chicago, just as the city is preparing for the World's Fair, which starts in 1893. And again, the Eric Larson book is a really cool account of the World's Fair.
Yeah.
And World's Fairs are cool. I didn't know. They sound boring, but they're not. They're really interesting.
Yeah, as we talked about in our Olympic marathon.
Yeah.
That was 1904.
04.
So a decade later when they debuted Dr. Pepper. What did they debut at the 1893 World's Fair?
Well, the big thing is I don't want to I guess I've already spoiled this. It's fine. The big new invention, because they wanted to do something from that would rival the Eiffel Tower from the Paris World's Fair, was the Ferris Wheel.
Right.
They came up with this, and this was this incredible. No one had ever seen that before. And Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, was involved in designing the grounds and everything. And it was just it's a huge deal. It's hard to even imagine what that was like, I think, for us now.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And the fair ended with the assassination of the mayor?
Yes.
That's crazy.
I know.
Wow. There's a lot going on in 1893 Chicago.
Yeah, so this is going on. It draws 27 million visitors to Chicago, a lot of young women as well, which were Holmes's kind of primary target. He's built Murder Castle, this 3-story tall building. As the story goes, he draws visitors to the World's Fair to this castle and kills them in very elaborate ways. In these stories, he's not the kind of guy who's kind of like stab you or whatever.
Right.
This place allegedly had trapdoors, chutes, soundproof rooms, gas chambers, a basement kiln where Holmes could cremate his victims' bodies, acid pits, quicklime, etc., etc. And in the Eric Larson book, he goes into like great detail about building the basement kiln and how, the people he hires to like design it in a special way.
Right. Yeah. Wasn't he like, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he hire like multiple builders at a time, or like only for like certain sections of the hotel, and then fire them and then hire other people so that really nobody knew? If he hired one group of contractors and was like, hey, can you make this building? They'd be like, this seems pretty dangerous. And also like, you're up to nothing, like up to no good. But
yeah, it's a devious guy. He, in addition to killing people, he was also involved in all these financial scams. He would buy things on credit and then hide them in the castle when the creditors came to check things out. And one person said in 1943, he said the castle had swallowed the furniture, as later it would swallow human beings. So he was involved in kind of all sorts of these scams.
Yeah, wow.
He would seduce women, get engaged to them, and then his fiancées would disappear. People who came to work for him also allegedly disappeared after he'd hired them. He made them name him as a beneficiary and then collected their life insurance policies. So he had, motivated by money, I guess, in all of this. It's really hard to know who he killed and how many people and everything, but his first victims and like some of the most likely victims were a woman named Julia and her daughter Pearl. Holmes was in a relationship with Julia, and then she and Pearl disappeared at the end of 1891. And Holmes had different stories about this. He sometimes said that she'd left to visit her dying sister, or that she died during an abortion. But a child's skeleton close to Pearl's age was later found at Murder Castle.
Oh, wow.
And then the worst part of that story was that at one point he'd paid someone, allegedly, to remove the skin from a woman's corpse so that he could sell her skeleton to medical school.
Oh, boy.
And this skeleton was unusually tall for a woman, and Julia was 6 feet tall. So probably her.
Man, just like so many. I mean, I know it's harder to keep track of people back then, and DNA evidence wasn't a thing, but it's just the idea, like so many steps along the way where he could have been caught and outed himself, like hiring somebody to remove skin from a person, presumably also a criminal operation. I don't think you're going to like a taxidermist down the street.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if he's in these scams and has been in these scams about selling cadavers, he must know the right people to reach out to. Yeah, a couple of his like likeliest victims are women, Emmeline Cigrand, Minnie Williams, her sister Nanny Williams. Holmes had personal and business relationships with Cigrand and Minnie Williams, and they all vanished mysteriously. So then the Chicago Fair ends and Holmes leaves, but he doesn't stop scamming or killing people. He meets this guy, Benjamin Pitzel, and they start a scam together. Originally, the idea is that Pitzel is going to fake his death for $10,000 in a life insurance scam. But then Holmes kills him for real. And
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Worse than that, he kidnaps his 3 children, Howard, Nellie, and Alice, who were between 7 and 14 years old. And he kept their mother was looking for them, and he kept like moving them around and she was trying to find them. And then he killed them as well. In the end, though, he's not arrested for murder, but for fraud. In 1894, he's arrested for trying to defraud Fidelity Mutual Insurance. At this point, Pitzel's wife says that she thinks that Holmes killed her husband. The police start to look around. They find the children's bodies. The 2 girls were found buried in a cellar in Toronto.
Okay, so he like left Chicago.
Yeah, he's all over the place. Toronto,
okay,
I mean, all over the place.
Wow.
Yeah.
All in the course of like a year.
Yes. He's a busy guy.
No rest for the wicked.
The girls were found locked in a trunk that the police think Holmes had filled with gas to kill them. And the boy was found, his charred remains were found in a cottage that Holmes rented in Indianapolis. So
Wow.
bad.
Yeah.
He definitely killed them. He confesses to killing 27 people and then 130 people. He then goes on to write this autobiography, which is not very truthful. What a surprise. He says he's, innocent and everything. But it's in this autobiography where he writes the line that I opened the episode with about I was born with the devil in me. So he's eventually found guilty of Benjamin Peitzel's murder in 1895, sentenced to death by hanging. And he's killed in Philadelphia the next year, shortly before turning 35. His last words, "Take your time, old man. Don't bungle it," to his executioner.
Well, got to respect
Yes. No, not too bad as
You
last
only
words go.
I was going to say you only get one shot at your last words, but that's actually not true. Right? Like, I mean,
Is
it's
it
not,
not
I guess
true?
it depends. Like, if you're actively dying and you're like, oh, I got to get one more thing out. Yeah, in a situation like this, you could presumably be like, look at the executioner and say, "Take your time, old man, don't bungle it," and be like, yeah, I nailed that. But like, if you look at him and you go, "Whoopie toopie doo," and you're like, let's try that again.
Yeah, I guess if you know
Right,
you're going
that's
to
what I
die,
mean.
you could
It's
run
not
through
like
a couple.
you only get one
yeah.
shot. It's like, well, hold on, wait. Let me try that again.
Yeah. Although I guess if you went through like 3 iterations of that and you're like, hold on, wait, that'd probably be included in your whole last
it's like,
word
it's
thing,
like,
you know?
when do you start the right?
When do you start? Yeah.
That'd be really funny though.
This reminds me, and this is like not important at all to this episode, but I was reading a biography of John Adams a couple years ago, and John Adams' last words were recorded as "Thomas Jefferson lives," which was a cool thing to say, although Thomas Jefferson had actually just died that same day. But then Adams, when he died, like gave out this like a yell kind of shriek thing. So that was his like actual last utterance. But that's not really what you would record. You would just be like, "Thomas Jefferson lives."
Yeah, you want to
word.
record their best last words, not their like.
Yes, your best.
Yeah.
Last words. Death, rattled, gasps. Yeah. In any case, he was buried 10 feet deep in a cement-filled coffin. Apparently he was worried about grave robbers, which makes sense because he was a grave robber. He knows what that's like. Since then, his story has been very much exaggerated. Even at the time, these newspapers are printing all these incredible stories about Murder Castle and what he did there. And in Larson's book, he takes some creative liberties as well in recounting the story. And I thought there's this interesting quote from Holmes himself where he says, he describes himself as but a very ordinary man, even below the average in physical strength and mental ability. To have planned and executed the stupendous amount of wrongdoing that has been attributed to me would have been wholly beyond my power.
You don't often encounter a humble serial killer.
Yeah, but doesn't it strike you a bit as like fake humility?
Yeah.
He's like, not me.
Well, yeah, I guess if he's also in that same autobiography declaring that he's innocent, it seems like a way of being like, but I could never have done all these things they said I did. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, right.
Fair enough.
Exactly. In any case, in the end, people have said that he killed between 20 and 200 people. He probably killed just 9 people. I mean, he killed 9 people. Whatever. A lot of people still.
It doesn't even count until you kill 10 people.
In double digits. It seems like he was just kind of confessing to like anything because 27 of the people he confessed to killing were still alive at the time. So there is this one guy, the author of H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. His name is Adam Seltzer. And he said that he thinks that these stories about this like murder castle and everything is fabrication by the Yellow Press. And indeed, there's no real evidence that he trapped strangers in Murder Castle and killed them. His victims were mostly people he already knew, and the building wasn't a hotel as it's often portrayed. It was just a building.
Right, yeah. I was always under the belief that it was a hotel, but he was like running.
He did tell people it was going to be a hotel, but he never did that. Just part of his like scamming investors.
Because that's like the whole appeal of the story, I guess. Like, or I mentioned when we've teased this episode previously, there's a video game called The Devil in Me, which is inspired by the story of H.H. Holmes. And that literally involves the main characters going into the hotel with all the traps and stuff. Which I think that paints like a certain image of him, that he would have this hotel, he'd invite guests in, and then you'd be caught unaware. But it not being a hood, like that's like a very scary idea. But that's not. Yeah,
it's like The Shining. I mean, not The Shining. Well, and The Shining, yes. I was actually thinking of Psycho.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're so vulnerable, and like they can get into your room, and
or there was that not to the same degree of crime, but there was that guy who had like I think the documentary about him was maybe just called The Voyeur, but he would like he had a motel, and then he would spy on people through like special openings that only he knew about, and like watch them have sex and stuff. But in the documentary, which I'm blanking on the name of, they actually interviewed the guy. He's very open and willing to talk about what he did. It's weird. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's creepy. Yeah. Well, in Holmes' case, he didn't have a hotel. Right. He just kind of lied about that. It has been suggested that he somehow bribed the authorities and escaped. And this, I guess, was believed to such an extent that his body was exhumed in 2017. It is still there. Or was still there. And Murder Castle is no more. It burned down in 1895, and it is now the site of a U.S. post office. This story also kind of came back to light in recent memory because H.H. Holmes' great-grandson suggested that he'd also been Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
Which maybe we will discuss more in our upcoming Jack the Ripper series.
Right. Is there any legitimate like argument to be made for that, or it's just the great-grandson?
No. The grandson, from what I could tell, the grandson was like, I have evidence that Holmes was Jack the Ripper. And then he was like, and now watch my History Channel show to find out. And there was nothing really reported on why that would be. Larson said he looked into it and the chronologies don't check out. Jack the Ripper, of course, operated, I mean, his canonical victims were in November or in autumn 1888.
Right. And Holmes was
in Chicago at the time. So it would be kind of difficult for him to get to Whitechapel and do all that.
Yeah, and it also just doesn't track. Like, why would he go to Whitechapel just to murder people? He's doing perfectly fine in Chicago with it.
Yeah. Well, Jack the Ripper seemed to murder mostly like sex workers, and H.H. Holmes would like draw women in and then murder them, get their money.
Yeah, and the Ripper also, I mean, earned his name the Ripper because of how gruesome the murders were, whereas Holmes was more, I guess, like methodical and subtle about stuff. He wasn't just leaving bodies on the street.
Right. If anything, he was selling bodies to...
Right. So he would want them in
for research.
In good condition.
Yeah, I think his motivation was more like money
kind
than
of
anything
ironic
else.
that then his great-great-grandson would try and swindle people. Huh? Looks like that runs in the family.
It's kind of ironic. Yeah.
It's called mudging.
Point.
I don't know if that's a term, but it should be a term.
Mudging. I like that. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're not big fans of the H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper theory.
I don't think it's... I don't think there's any evidence to support that.
I put together our outline for our discussion episode for Jack the Ripper, which is all like the suspects. Not all of them, because there's like a lot, but some of the top ones. And it is interesting. Some of them you're like, oh, okay. And some of them you're like, And Holmes is definitely one you're kind of like, he wasn't even in the right country. And to me, those two don't. They're just operating around at the same time. And that was their only similarity.
Right. I mean, it's not, but like, so many serial killers. It's not like no one's out there being like, I don't know, guys. I don't think Dahmer did it. I think it was all Bundy because they were around the same time. Like, two bad people can exist at once. Stalin and Hitler operated at the same time.
Yeah, I guess it's because Jack the Ripper, like, no one knows who it is. So it's like, maybe he's also this killer.
It's people just wanting to like reach and be like, oh, well, maybe I've figured it out. And it's like, no. You didn't, sorry.
Well, and isn't it like a better version of the world if only one person is capable of doing like horrible things?
Like, but that's just not reality. Like bad people exist in tandem all the time.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of some of these Holmes questions I think we'll revisit with Jack the Ripper too, but like, is there a reason you think this story is stuck around for so long?
I mean, I think the timing of it, definitely, with it coinciding with the World's Fair, the fact that he wrote his own autobiography about it. And then, I think just the fact that it got so misconstrued, because the idea of the murder hotel is scary. Like you said, because you're so vulnerable. And so I think that element of the story is what really sticks with people, where it's like, oh God, can you imagine like visiting Chicago and then you go to stay in this, what you think is a nice hotel. And then it's like, turns out murder.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it kind of feeds into my other question is like, why it was exaggerated. And like the obvious answer is because people bought newspapers when it was
Right.
exaggerated. And it's this loop. And then why do we still talk about it? It's because people bought papers back then. People buy the
Right.
story now because it's this sensationalist story.
Well, that was like yellow journalism, right? It was like popping up around that time where everything was sensationalized. And also, like, had there really been a serial killer in America prior to him?
He's considered to be like one of the first ones.
That's what I thought. So I'm sure that has something to do with it as well. Like him and Jack the Ripper being two of the earliest known modern examples.
Right.
Because for all we know, there was a Stone Age guy killing a bunch of other people, but there's no way to know it.
Sure.
But, when we think of like a modern serial killer, it's Holmes and Jack the Ripper were like.
Well, and I would think that American journalists would look at the British example of how well papers are selling with Jack the Ripper
Fair.
stories. Now they have something so similar, shades of similarity, and to follow that model. It's like the birth of true crime.
Yeah, I mean, literally, even if you Google first serial killer, Holmes is the one that Smithsonian Magazine has, Library of Congress pops up. So yeah, I think that's definitely got something to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it must have been easier to be a serial killer, like
Oh, for sure.
back in the day. Just move on.
Back in like medieval England,
Yeah.
you could kill anybody.
Yeah, so it's a weird story. I was really surprised researching it, like how much was exaggerated in Larson's book, which again I did really enjoy quite a lot when I read it.
Yeah. Other than Holmes's like semi-fictitious autobiography, did he like take notes or anything that Larson referenced?
I mean, I did read this book a couple of years ago, but what I remember is Larson describing people's interactions with Holmes, which I assume must have been like newspapers at the
Right.
time, his contractors, the pharmacy where he worked, things like that. He must have looked through his autobiography as well.
Okay, yeah. Like, because you mentioned like the scenes in the book of him like killing people in the basement. And I'm just curious if like Holmes kept a record anywhere
Yeah.
of like the stuff he did or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. But I remember like reading the book and it would be like the victim thinking something. And I was like, how could you know that? That seems unlikely. Again, I do enjoy his books. I've read 2 or 3 of them. But yeah, they're very readable. They read like novels.
That's cool. And he's clearly a talented author.
Yeah, he's a new book coming out about the Civil War
Oh, that's
next
cool.
year. Fort Sumter. Yeah. It is interesting. This one I feel like kind of sets us up well to talk about Jack the Ripper in terms of the newspaper angle. And
yeah, it'll be interesting when we circle back around to it to like kind of compare and contrast how the stories were told and just like the lasting impact of them.
yeah,
I mean, Jack the Ripper is obviously stuck around very much because of the mystery.
right. For sure. I mean, I knew about Jack the Ripper more than I knew about H.H. Holmes.
Right. I'm sure most people do, but
Yeah.
no, it is really interesting, Holmes' story. I do think it's had a resurgence in the past few years. I feel, was there a reference to H.H. Holmes in like one of the American Horror Stories?
I don't know. I mean, Larson's book came out, I think, in 2003, excuse me.
Ryan Murphy, who I can't stand, but I'll let that slide for the second, apparently took inspiration from H.H. Holmes when crafting the story of the 5th season of American Horror Story.
Is it in a hotel?
Yeah, I
Or,
think
like,
it's
what's
literally called Hotel. Yeah.
I see. Yes.
I swear H.H. Holmes is, if not a character in it, a character Evan Peters plays is heavily inspired by Holmes. So I think it's entered the pop culture zeitgeist more in recent years, I think.
Yeah.
Especially, like I said, I mean, they're even making video games off of it now and stuff. It is interesting to talk about.
It's like the cyclical nature of interest in people.
I love that he got caught for fraud in the end. I just think that's so funny.
Yeah. I mean, he was a fraudster at heart. That's kind of like what he was. He just didn't care if he had to kill people to do that.
Yeah, we're going to be switching things up a little bit next time around. We'll have a little bit of a break between now and The Ripper. We have Christmas Legends coming up next, some of which are pretty dark.
Okay, I was going to ask. Because it seems like it could be like we're doing H.H. Holmes and then we're doing like Christmas legends, but...
We're talking about like 5 of them, I think. Some of them are pretty dark. The Yule Cat and like the Yule Lads and Gryla, the Christmas Witch of Iceland who eats babies. But then there's like other ones like the Mary Lloyd, which is like a Welsh tradition of people going door to door singing songs and having basically old-timey rap battles. So there's a little bit of a variety there. So it'll be a nice little break between 2 somewhat more grisly stories here. And then we have our 100th episode, I believe, before the Jack the Ripper ones.
Before Jack the Ripper, yeah. 100 episodes, pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're going back in, talking about some updates to some old cases, including Dyatlov Pass, the
Delphi murders.
Is it Delphi murders? I always think Delphi.
Oh,
I think it is
Delphi. And the other one,
the Somerton Man.
They all have fascinating, sometimes tragic, bizarre updates.
Yeah,
that we shall get into.
It'd be interesting to look back on some stuff, talk about our favorite episodes we've done, things like that.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising given how many episodes we have done and how many of them are about missing people or history or whatever that there haven't been more updates. Yeah. Really, it's like DB Cooper. We still don't know who he is.
That's a crazy story. That story is insane.
It is really crazy, but they don't know. It's still a mystery. Yeah. So that'll be great. And then we'll get into Jack the Ripper and then more good stuff.
Yeah. More stuff on the horizon.
Always good stuff.
New year, new episodes. Same old Austin and Kalina.
Yes. Yes. And maybe more Kara too next year.
I love when we have the 3 of us. I think it is so fun.
Yeah. That was really fun for History Happy Hour last week or whenever that was.
Yeah. I guess 2 weeks ago by the time this comes out. Whatever.
Time. Yes. Yeah.
And as always, you can read more about these stories, read all about H.H. Holmes on allthat'sinteresting.com. Become a member by going to allthat'sinteresting.com/membership and then join our newsletter at allthat'sinteresting.com/sign up.
And if you have a question about the show, a story you want us to cover, or just want to say hello, you can, of course, do that. Leave us a voicemail at 929-526-3029 or email us at podcast@allthat'sinteresting.com.
Let us know if your grandfather was Jack the Ripper.
Yes. I'd love to hear it. You can also leave us a review, of course,
always appreciated.
On Apple, Spotify, wherever. Say hello there as well. Yes,
I
always
see your criticisms. I bury them deep within my soul and feel worse about myself. So keep it coming.
Keep it coming. We got a nice one.
I know.
And then we have an Instagram too, and a TikTok
at History Uncovered Podcast on Instagram and at Real History Uncovered on TikTok.
Yes, and we just started the Instagram, and it's going well.
Yeah, it
so
is.
Far.
Fun little way to send, some quick history facts to your friends, because we just put up the reels and then you can just be like, here, check this out.
Click share. Yes.
Or just scroll through it and then just learn a fact and be like, I'm smart now. And then you always have something to talk about. That's the best thing about this job for us. And if you're a listener, the nice thing about listening to a podcast like this is that you always learn something new and something interesting.
Yes.
And then you can relay that information to other people and you come across smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's
never mind the fact that I forget half of what I wrote the second it's done. But,
I know, it's so funny. What you write today?
Man, what did I write today?
I have no idea what I wrote today. Oh, I wrote about Jonathan the Tortoise being really old.
I wrote about the Rockefeller Center at Beam.
Oh yeah, that looks horrible.
It looks kind of cool. It doesn't swing you out as much as it looks like in the videos and stuff. It really just like raises you up and spins you around.
How
you go like 12
how much
feet
does it raise you up?
Above the top of the rock.
Above the top of the rock?
And then you're like strapped into
Holy
it. There's
moly.
like seatbelts, obviously. But it doesn't, I like the initial video I saw looked like it swung you over the side of the building. It doesn't.
Oh.
Yeah, it just brings you up.
Wow. Well, we'll be skipping that. All right. Well, I guess that's
Thanks for listening.
We'll be back next week with
2
Christmas
weeks.
Legends.
We'll be back in 2 weeks. We're taking it a little easy in December as the year winds down.
Yeah. Thank God.
But next time we'll get we'll have our eggnog, the non-alcoholic kind. Well, maybe.
We should have alcoholic eggnog.
Yeah, whatever.
I've never had alcoholic
it's so
eggnog.
good. I have some in our fridge right now. Yeah, or just add rum to regular
It's like
eggnog.
dangerous though. It's not bourbon? Is it rum?
Usually like a spiced rum, but you can do bourbon. I think the pre-mixed one is rum and bourbon. A blend.
I see. Someone in my running club said bourbon the other day, and I was like, oh, that sounds amazing.
Good. Either one, really. Can't go wrong.
Excellent. Well, maybe I'll get my hands on some of that.
For sure.
All right. Till next time.
Adios.